Hi, this is Jim Lange. In this video series, I have talked about the death of the Stretch IRA, which is a proposed law that would limit the ability of your children or grandchildren or other non-spousal heirs to defer income taxes over their lifetimes with this proposed legislation known as the death of the Stretch IRA. And I've explained what a Stretch IRA is and what the death of the Stretch IRA would do. And I've talked about some various strategies, but what this video will concentrate on is one strategy that will not work for most people, but for the people who it might work for, it could actually have enormous positive impact for your family. And that is a charitable remainder trust. The first thing you're saying is, wait, Jim, I'm charitable, but I'm not more charitable than leaving money to my kids. I'd love to leave some money to charity, but my kids are first. So let's assume that, all right? Let's assume that you're much more interested in providing for your children than the charity. So why would I even start by considering a charitable remainder trust in lieu of money going to your children? And by the way, charitable remainder trust is not the starting point. The starting point, potentially using the disclaimers also discussed in a prior video and discussed in the webinar, which we will give you access to at the end of this video, talked about the Lange's cascading beneficiary plan and disclaimers and flexible estate planning, where typically, even with the proposed law, and this, by the way, is something that you should not be doing now, but you should only be doing after the proposed law actually becomes law. But let me give you one potential scenario, and let's assume for discussion's sake that you have a $1,450,000 IRA. And let's assume for discussion's sake, and let's leave your spouse out of it, although typically we name the spouse as the primary beneficiary. But let's leave the spouse out of this analysis. Let's assume that you have a $1,450,000 IRA, and let's assume that your beneficiary is your son and you only have one child. So what would we recommend as at least one interesting possibility? Well, first, consistent with the proposed law, is your son would be able to shield $450,000 from the death of the Stretch IRA legislation and would be able to stretch $450,000 of the inherited IRA, just like under current law. But the problem is, what about the remaining million? So what would happen, assuming that they pass the law, you die with $1.45 million in your, $1,450,000 in your IRA, you leave $450,000 to your child. What happens to that million? And let's forget about growth for a moment. Within 5 years of your death, your child's going to have to pay income tax on that entire $1 million, leaving him, let's say, $600,000. All right? Well, that's not so wonderful. So why the charitable remainder trust? What's interesting about the charitable remainder trust, and here's ultimately, I'm going to oversimplify for a moment what a charitable remainder trust would say. It would say income, and there'd be actually a technical definition of income that isn't exactly income, but for our purposes, let's oversimplify and call it income. Income for the life of the child, and then at the child's death, whatever's left goes to charity. All right? So how could that possibly be better than just leaving it to your children outright? Well, if you leave it to your children outright, again, using that $1 million example, and they get whacked with a $400,000 tax bill, then they only get $600,000 left. They invest that, they're earning income on $600,000. Now, the beauty of the Charitable Remainder Unitrust is it is not subject to income tax until you actually take withdrawals for the child. So that $1 million stays intact. It's not whacked in the first 5 years. Yes, your child's going to have to pay income taxes on the annual withdrawals, but that's going to only be on the income, or a portion, a much smaller portion than getting whacked at the whole time. So let's oversimplify. Is your child better off with the income on $600,000 and the ability to eat into that income or or spend the corpus of that $600,000, or are they better off with the income, but again, they lose the corpus or the principal at their deaths? So the answer, of course, is I'm going to answer like an attorney. It depends. What does it depend on? It depends on how, well, a whole bunch of factors, but it really depends on how long the child's going to live. Because, again, the CRUT isn't going to get the big income tax hit, isn't going to get the big income tax acceleration. So why don't we compare two examples? You leave $1 million to a CRUT or $1 million to a charitable, $1 million to a CRUT or $1 million to your child outright under the proposed law. And again, don't do this now, only do this when the proposed law actually passes. So what you can see is if you leave the $1 million to your child, yes, he gets whacked with taxes, he reinvests that money, and this red line becomes his, let's say, future ARC using certain reasonable assumptions. Now instead, and by the way, we're based, to oversimplify, we're saying, okay, the money's going to get whacked, there's $400,000 left, I'm sorry, $600,000 left, that money's invested, and we're going to add that investment or that interest income to the balance so it continues to grow. All right, alternative number two, charitable remainder trust. Child's getting only the income, not the corpus, but he's getting it on the full $1 million. So he's starting at zero compared to, say, $1 million minus the taxes. But he's getting the income on a full $1 million. So he's going to eventually catch up. The break-even point, using the set assumptions here that we're using, is somewhere around 73, but ultimately be significantly higher by about $500,000 over the child's life than if you just left it to the child. All right, so that looks pretty interesting. However, you also have to take into account some of the negatives. The cost to draft it. It's not free. By the way, the cost to draft it is relatively insignificant compared to the cost of maintaining it after you die, because now you need a trustee, you need a tax return, you need a tax return that throws off a K-1, so you're mucking up the beneficiaries' tax return. There are some complications, so we don't like doing it for small amounts. And now, and if you look at the original book that I wrote about this, which was called The Ultimate Retirement and Estate Plan for Your $1 Million IRA, I was much more enthusiastic about charitable remainder trusts because at that time we didn't know about the $450,000 exclusion. So in the original book, if you had a $600,000 IRA, and I went through some of this analysis, it would lead you to think, hey, the CRUT might be a pretty good thing on a $600,000 IRA for one beneficiary. Well, since now we can exclude $450,000, does it make sense to do a charitable remainder trust for $150,000? The answer is no, because the cost of maintaining it would exceed the tax savings. On the other hand, if you're talking about $1 million after the exclusion for one beneficiary, it is certainly something to strongly consider. But wait, you say, what if the child dies early, then the grandchild's disinherited? And that is also a legitimate objection. And our answer to that is, why don't you take some of the extra income that you received from getting the income on the $1 million compared to the $600,000 and buy a cheap term life insurance policy on the beneficiary, that is the child. So if the child dies early, the grandchild will be compensated by the life insurance policy. Anyway, we've run numbers on that, and that looks very positive. So there's a lot of things you can do with a charitable remainder trust. It's obviously not for everybody. Now, why wouldn't I say you should do this now? Because the existing law with the Stretch IRA is much more favorable than the charitable remainder trust. So unless you're terribly charitable or there's other very good reasons to do it, I would not do this until the proposed law actually passes. Then check in with the drafting attorney or the estate planner, see if it still makes sense, and if it does, seriously consider using a charitable remainder trust as the ultimate beneficiary of your IRA instead of your children. And the ultimate result, assuming everything goes right and it's administered appropriately and it's the right amount, is that your child will get a higher income, will get much more money on their over their lifetime, maybe by a couple $100,000 or more. Charity's going to get some money at the end, and the big loser is the IRS. I hope this is helpful. If you are more interested in this and related topics, I would urge you to listen to our, it's a little bit more than an hour, but let's call it hour-long webinar, which you can access by clicking on the link below. And there's other additional resources. If you listen to that webinar, we'll give you access to books and more videos and other resources that will help you make better decisions. Thank you.